All right, YouTube, we are here reacting to another video, Doom 64. What happened? Matt McMuscles out here made this video. He does a lot of videos on this whole What Happened series. And essentially, it's just like, what happened? And it's usually like on a bad topic, like oh, something went downhill. So we're going to see what happened with Doom 64. Matt, if you don't know, he used to be part of Best Friends Play, but I recently got back into him because of podcast Triple KO. Regardless, let us begin. Hell yeah. Boom. Nice, Let's raise the volume just a tad for you guys. I know it's a bit low right now. Peasy peasy easy. What happened? I love that whole what happened? That's like the whole Mickey Mouse meme too.
Welcome back, fellow space marines.
There it is.
To another
there it is.
rage raring and rippin' tearing episode of What Happened,
done, baby.
YouTube-style pop culture media show that digs its fists deep.
I always love the little graphics that Matt always does too. These look so good. Not Randy Pitchford.
Since we've now officially entered
Dude, we're
the
memeing
dark
now.
ages,
Yeah.
it seems a good a time as any
because Doom 64 connects with all this stuff. In case you guys didn't know.
Entries in the legendary Doom franchise.
Yeah, I'm gonna do this real quick too.
Off quite as you'd expect.
Oh man, this is so cool.
Its full potential that the dev team had for it, and took over 20 years for many fans to finally gain an appreciation for.
Is it?
So grab your double chainsaws and
I'm clicking on my camera. Oh, there it is.
As I answer the question,
Dude, I just want to go back for a second. Look at his little, look at his little little PNG guy. I love that. I love that.
Over 20 years
That's so cool.
fans to finally
but yeah, I know a lot of people didn't even play Doom 64. So, yeah, it recently came out with Doom Eternal. I know that they were selling a version with Doom 64 with it.
To Doom 64.
So this is going to be interesting. There we go.
Now,
but yeah,
you can't
and it looks different too, but it's awesome. I think it was only on the it was only on the 1064, obviously, because of the 64 in the title.
Wolfenstein
3D.
For the SNES. Yes, as bizarre as it may seem, our story begins with one of the most infamous ports in first-person shooter history,
which means not good.
Has its own very
issues.
What happened development story.
Yeah, again, the whole series is like, what went wrong? It's crazy because it kind of became a cult classic when it really wasn't to begin with.
And it all started when Japanese
the 32X?
Imagineer hit up id Software to bring the explosive adventures of BJ Blazkowicz to
also, do people say ID Software? I know some people do. BJ Blasters. Do people say ID Software? Because they really shouldn't. It's straight up id. You know what I'm saying? And then on top of that, dude, it's crazy. Dude, the Sega 32X and stuff, like all those disc add-ons and stuff.
Of course, we're happy to do such, but you see, it had a problem.
Maybe I'll just move myself here.
Of course, we're happy to do such, but you see,
I just moved over here because I figured this makes a lot more sense.
They were knee-deep
since
in
he's
the
doing his little PNG on the other side
of the original Doom,
but yeah,
and
this is
none
cool.
of its main staff, Carmack,
yeah,
Romero,
they weren't on
Hall,
64, right?
etc., had the time or even the know-how to program for.
Was that Markiplier? Why does he kind of look like? I'm pretty sure that's Romero, but why does he look like Markiplier? Is that Taylor Lautner in the back? Hey, yo, they got Taylor Lautner and Markiplier working on Doom 60 on Doom,
etc. Have the time or even the know-how to program for the SNES.
Yeah,
it made sense.
I'd imagine
that they contracted an outside developer that assigned him the task and got back to focusing on their top priority, which of course was fighting demons on the moons of Mars.
The demons on the moons. Yeah, if you guys don't know, the demons in Doom are like interdimensional beings. Same thing in Devil May Cry, pretty much.
To which id said,
"Oh crap, I forgot."
Yeah.
So they quickly got on the phone to get an update from the unnamed third party.
This is interesting because I'm actually kind of learning a little bit. I love these type of developing stories.
And hadn't made any significant progress at all. So id then had to set Doom aside for a few weeks and learn the ins and outs of the SNES in record time, so they could get Wolfenstein out the door to make the release date set by Imagineer.
This must be why Wolfenstein was kind of poopy.
Also didn't account for was Nintendo's strict guidelines,
their guidelines ratings. Yeah, I'd imagine that it'd be heavy hard
of the ESRB, which would result in several cuts and changes.
Dang, what was the ESRB made? I know it was like for Night Trap and stuff. I guess, yeah.
The you know,
I guess it was after.
Everything that clearly identified Wolfenstein as
I don't know how that makes the game.
Conflict.
I see there's no armband or anything there either.
With the release date
that's crazy, bro.
And no time to argue, it
makes
just
sense, though, that Nintendo would be so heavy-handed back then.
So suffice it to say, nobody had a great time working on this port, as it very much became a chapter of id history.
A bunch of just scrubbing.
Wanted to put behind them. This is bolstered.
That's funny too, because this is a Doom 64 video. Now we're like Wolfenstein.
Jay Wilbur,
but you gotta get the full story.
Business development back then.
You gotta get the full story.
The following. The result of the experience at that time was us opting not to do another game with Nintendo.
That makes sense.
These policies were in place.
They can't.
Something I told
their games,
Nintendo
it doesn't work.
Council,
it's just censorship.
Howard Lincoln personally,
makes sense.
As I recounted our frustration on the development process.
That's nuts,
and
bro.
It might very well have remained
makes sense, though.
as such.
The HRB got made and all that stuff.
1994, where it received another unlikely call from another unlikely source.
They got a call.
Being Williams Entertainment Inc.
Hello.
Who would, just a few years later, change their name to perennial What Happened All-Star Midway Games, which I'll be referring to from now on.
Midway be making a lot of. Did you guys ever play like a bunch of like this old like Midway games, like arcade games, like Narc and stuff? I know those were like out on like Xbox and like collections and such. A lot of those games were kind of booty, so I understand why a lot of Midway games would be on What Happened, because I'm just saying, I think there's a reason why they're pretty much out of business now. Or not pretty much, why they are out of business.
Cook, formerly a TradeWest co-founder,
Brian Cook.
That Midway
I don't think he cooked,
the exclusive publishing rights
I don't think he cooked,
PC
bro.
output on consoles, which, you know, is a pretty sound business decision.
I'd imagine trying to do ports like this back in the day were like nigh impossible too.
As compared
just
to other publishing
the way
partners they had previously dealt with, respected the Williams
just the amount of like work put in and such because of the quality of the performance. I don't know, it's like the parts. The parts were definitely less powerful. There we go.
First directives, however, was a
so real it hurts. Man.
See, they, along with various
marketing,
other Western studios
this is pretty nuts. 90s marketing's always my favorite, man. It's always crazy.
That was set to change the industry.
An N64.
3D polygon pushing powerhouse that could definitely provide a good
that's what I'm saying.
For its
the performance was always really hard.
Yes.
So 64 coming out was pretty huge.
All Midway had to do is convince its software
I think that's why it looks more like clay
the very same platform
than sprites
that they had swore off from ever working with.
Yeah, and then the 64DD and whatnot stuff. That was pretty bad stuff too.
As you can imagine, id were hesitant about working with Nintendo once more, but
I'm genuinely curious. Also, wasn't the Doom cartridge
they were
red?
Initially against the idea as long as Nintendo still had their content policies in place, which in 1994 they no longer did, as the ESRB had taken over those duties.
Because of Night Trap and GTA
so Doom was
and whatnot, so that makes sense.
The SNES, which, as we know, had its fair share
of issues. That was pretty bad.
It was still
not nearly as bad as Wolfenstein.
Achievement nonetheless.
Not nearly as bad as the Wolfenstein one, I know that.
Nintendo's then
look at all those pixels.
Received a pretty significant
that definitely
delay from 1995 to late 1996.
That definitely helped them probably too.
Which naturally meant that the development of a new Doom game was further off than Midway
had
to
work on it, though.
Estimated. So, with Nintendo feverishly working away in secret,
it's crazy that people didn't see Doom 64. I think the problem was I'm gonna be real. I guarantee that one big issue that's gonna be brought up is exclusivity at the time. Because here's the thing: we have exclusive games now, but definitely back then, I feel like exclusive games would be super hard to market, especially just because the pricing, especially back then, was pretty Wild Westy. Essentially, a lot of games were, you could go look at the Sears catalog. Wow, an ancient rune. And essentially you'd see like NES games for $110 and stuff like that. So
an impressive version of Doom.
That would definitely
biggest competitor.
The PlayStation.
Brian Cook
That one also was a bit wacky too.
Doom for Sony's PlayStation in the meantime,
but disc, the comeback disc probably
just twiddling their thumbs
was a lot good space-wise, so you could have better textures and whatnot.
Aaron Sealer, the
it's not a cartridge. Now that's not really much of an issue, but still cartridges do hold less.
The PSX version was a 2-for-1 byproduct of the N64 deal, and served as a base for all the research and development tech and tools we would need to bring up for the N64, which was not anywhere close to specs or silicon. All of the N64's capabilities were wild guessing. So they didn't know how. I see. So they're making it without knowing the N64's capabilities. Okay, I'd imagine that's also a bit wacky and a bit hard. From the boyish, bi-spectacled, omnipresent void of eldritch knowledge.
I love Carmack, bro.
Of course,
I'm so sad that he left the VR industry. Well, he basically got kicked out of it.
Also saw plenty of new benefits
because he could have been very like innovative things. I think he was the reason why Doom 3 is even like in VR. He's a big reason why.
The composer of Doom 1 and 2 retained the rights to the iconic music he had created, which meant if any future
a lot of the music too
were to be based on his tracks, he would need to be compensated, and that wasn't gonna work for
Midway. Yeah, so that's why they probably just made new songs. But also, I don't know, I feel like taking so much like pride into the Doom 1 soundtrack's a bit strange. Is it really good? Oh yeah, I love it. But if you really listen to it, it really is just riffs from popular like songs. Like a lot of them are just like midis of popular song riffs. So like
Midway,
I'm just gonna say
brother. Instead,
I'm just gonna say it.
Aubrey Hodges was assigned to the job with the mandate that the music for this new version of Doom had to sound distinctly different. Hodges therefore leaned into more
obviously the 64 would have better sound as well. Industrial horror is interesting.
Significantly, and along with
because it wasn't like if I recall, it was like it felt more like a Doom 3.
So when Doom arrived
I did play Doom 64
console in late 1995, it was met with positive
and now the original Doom PlayStation, they changed the music. So they did. I see. So they did that before. Okay, so this was for the Doom on the PlayStation where they changed the music. I see. And on Doom 64, it was kind of similar if I recall. So I think this is kind of cool because this is where they started doing like going Doom 3 route. It looks like even back then, which makes sense.
The Midway team had achieved.
I imagine a lot of games were turning more horror.
The slightly new look and
because obviously Silent Hill and Resident Evil was being popular in the original PlayStation. So if they make this a bit more scary,
weapons,
like sounding, I can see that.
Over the original,
so they started doing it since back then, I suppose. That's interesting.
Release was already 2 years old.
But obviously people like the music still huge in Doom today with the Dark Ages. So
it provided a ton of valuable
they're definitely going back to the old days and not Doom 3 route in terms of ambience.
64. Now, while the specs of the machine were reportedly greatly reduced from what Nintendo had
look at those, the lighting of the analog ports.
Sealer felt they were more than adequate and has gone on record saying, outside of storage space issues, it was easier to
cartridge storage space
overall.
Yeah,
but the team at Midway and
let's see what they do here. Though
the company
I generally like wonder.
To remake
I feel like a big issue was exclusivity.
The idea was to create
it's like a sequel though.
Chapter that would provide fans with an all-new experience.
It's cool because this is super canon. Like Doom 64, if you haven't played it, it's really important to the story of the Doomslayer and the new Doom reboot.
64 team were keen to push things into unfamiliar territory, which would certainly make
it's definitely a lot more chunky
fresh approach.
It's definitely a lot more chunky too.
We're uncomfortable with this and kept telling Midway it needed to be more.
I really enjoyed Doom 64 when I played it.
So those grander ambitions kept getting scaled back into something more familiar. Aaron Sealer even commented on this in a pre-release interview in the March 19.
R3D now, there's restrictions we put to keep the Doom was. I mean, there's no look up and down. Stuff can be done, but it wasn't because the game wouldn't have been Doom. Yep. Yeah, now a lot of people do free look on Doom with the mouse. You couldn't do that before. It was always just left and right. And if you would shoot it, the bullet would just automatically hit if the demon was on elevation. So they're talking about like new levels, old Doom levels. You have the same sorts of things, and they're like, "Yep, but there's more 3 keys doesn't. Okay, cool. No, this is cool. I love seeing these like old reviews too. Like it's like, oh, it's very similar, but the new stuff's going to change it slightly. Plasma gun's going to work like a rapid fire gun that you remember. Okay, cool. The BFG still going to take out huge. Oh,
official Nintendo.
You scared me. I hit space. Thanks for the right pancake. You the real one. Okay, BFG still going to take out huge hordes of mutants. I kind of say mutants instead of demons. It shows whatever the interviewer was, they did not know what the hell they were talking about. Get spooked, idiot. That's why I have it like that, dude. It's going to require understanding how weapons work a little better. Okay.
UK magazine.
This is cool.
Saying id wanted us to be true to what Doom was.
And they definitely did.
Originally, we had a lot of different ideas about taking Doom in a different direction. And they were like, no, Doom is like this. Don't mess with the equation too much.
Which is what they're kind of doing now with the Dark Ages a bit, for sure. It's less of a dodgy game, more of a parry game, which is a bit sausage.
Types of
I'm just going to say it.
Elements because we wanted to exploit the N64.
Doom 64 is cool, though.
Like, cool, but that's
I think the environments are sick.
Were very particular about their game, which I understand perfectly, but
that's cool.
We were allowed to experiment with some areas of the game, and at that point, they basically said, okay, you guys are on track. Keep going in this direction.
Yeah, they just made the architecture really a bit like,
some of this information is what 64, may have led to the rumor
3D.
that Doom 64
That's probably why all the demons are like clay.
To be a Doom game at all, but rather an unrelated FPS simply called the Absolution.
Okay, see, this is new to me. I didn't know this.
However, this seems to
if that's true, I didn't know. It sounds like a rumor. Purple Monkey Dishwater. Isn't that from like Code Monkeys? I'm pretty sure that's like a Code Monkeys reference.
A very common practice where publishers want to keep the existence
I'm old. I know what that is.
Game a secret. So, just to clear the air, this was always supposed to be Doom.
Or is that Simpsons? No, that's Simpsons.
Midway
I'm stupid.
Contacted
I think Simpsons. Okay, I think that Code Monkeys must have referenced Simpsons.
For Nintendo's then upcoming console. Related but unrelated, though.
Dude, that's like a triple reference.
There was a issue with the game's final name. In the Shack News article, it was revealed that all the parties involved, id, Midway, and Nintendo, had to go back and forth
they're showing
several times to land on the title that would appear on the game's box art.
Doom
Even
64.
though it had always been planned as a sequel or spin-off of sorts, it would not
it's
allow
crazy
this
though
project to be called
how this game's just a cult classic now. Like I just gotta say it again.
Sequel was something they wanted to keep
what happened
for themselves.
Though? Was it what I said with exclusivity? I need to know.
Including the name Doom was non-negotiable.
Of course. Why would they ever take away the
brand?
Why would they take Doom out of the title?
Absolution or Resurrection or anything else.
Nah, you need that. No, not Borderlands.
Nintendo, however, was again simply just calling it Doom, as they felt every game had to have some sort of subtitle to differentiate it from all the other ports.
The 64.
But nobody wanted players to think that
I think that's probably a problem too. Now that I think about it, that's the problem as well.
It very much
the subtitle was 64, so people probably also thought.
Suggestions, everyone just kind of threw up their hands and settled on Doom 64.
This is what I'm saying. I think that I didn't even think about that. Yeah. One, exclusivity on console, which is probably why I didn't do so hot on release. Two, that does just make it sound like a Doom port. That does. To me, I would think that's probably a port of some sort. I probably would not think that was just like a sequel of some. Like, yeah, you would think it's a 64-bit port. Yeah, they should have subtitled it or something, because that doesn't work. Or at least, or call it. That's hard, because it is true. You can't really just go Doom 364, because that's like, what? Like, it seems like every Nintendo 64 game had to have 64 at the end. Mario 64, like all that stuff. Which is really funny. But yeah, it should have had some sort of, like, I don't think they needed it. Dude, I don't think every single Nintendo 64 game had 64 on there. They could have definitely changed that.
This, of course, would go on to have its own drawbacks, because outside of the Nintendo franchises
people that don't know
did use the 64 suffix, it meant that some gamers would eventually lump this Doom together with the likes of Duke Nukem 64 or
which was a Duke 64. Yep, Duke Nukem 64 was a port. Comrade Guide was probably a port as well.
If you allow me to
yeah.
circle straight
and
back
if they used, also, they didn't even change the icon. The icon was still the same.
And the rest of the team enjoyed working on Nintendo's polygonal-based console for the
We're
most
learning.
part.
We're learning today.
They did bemoan the lack of storage space on N64 cartridges.
Cartridges still have less storage space.
Juncture, only 64
I think the Switch 2 has 64. That's funny. I think 64 gigabytes is the cap for for the cartridges today. I'm pretty sure. And that's the reason why we're getting game key cards, because they only have the 64 gigabyte game cards. So if somebody has like a 4 gigabyte game, they're not going to pay the extra cost for the 64 gigabyte card. They're going to digitize it, which is why we have game key cards, which is lame because back in the original Switch, they had choices between 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Now they're just like, nope, 64 gigabytes. And this is why the age of digital is occurring.
Available to work
it all goes back.
This meant several OG monsters, bosses, and weapon animation frames needed to be cut. But they did make up for this
fine, though.
by introducing
they made really cool new ones.
Weapon, the Unmaker, as well
That's
as
so
the
sick,
Nightmare Imp, which
I like the Calico Demon they have. It has like 3 heads and shoots out lost souls.
The new end boss,
if I recall.
Mother of all demons. Most regrettable of all, though, was the loss of any sort of multiplayer mode.
Yeah, but it's on the 64, though, so.
The intro screen seems to hint at multiple Marines taking on demons
but those
in
are just,
hectic battle royale.
Those are just other guys. There's other guys.
Wasn't something the team
I think that's fair for the 64 port.
To be fair, aside from Mario Kart,
I guess for the I did it. I think that's fair for the Doom 64 game though.
Hadn't really established itself yet as a multiplayer-centric console.
Well, yeah, aren't you like an editor pancake? Of course.
Midway did try an attempt to cope over this inability to include.
I'm not gonna do that though. You haven't done anything wrong.
In that same Nintendo UK interview,
here we go.
There's no deathmatch. If it couldn't be done right, there was no point to it. Multiplayer is a neat thing to see for about 5 minutes. Then it's just
cool,
like,
but
it works for other games.
I don't see people doing that on the N64 personally.
Put down your chainsaws, rabid fans.
You know what? Also, I think that's a bad take. Did he just say that deathmatch is cool for 5 minutes and it works for other games and not for Doom? I swear, if he starts talking about the Doom deathmatch, you can self-bet. Yeah. If he's talking about the Doom deathmatch from Doom 2016, I'm going to be so happy because I actually did love that mode. And I think it's stupid that they cut it from Eternal and they made this dumbass, what's it called? Like demon versus human mode. That was the one that was cool for like 5 minutes and then it got boring. The one that was actually sick was original Doom 2016 deathmatch. I thought that was badass. And now Dark Ages, I don't think they even have any any multiplayer component. I don't think there's even one. Which is baffling. They're going backwards. They're really going backwards now that I think about it.
As it should be noted that Aaron Sealer was responding to Nintendo UK's conceit that FPS split screen.
If you did that, you know what I'm talking about. That's all I'm saying.
You could always see your opponent's location, and to be fair,
it's about screen looking.
Turok didn't ship with one either.
Yeah, that'd be screen looking's a bit annoying, I'd imagine, especially for like Doom.
Just how popular the feature would become, as it would later propel GoldenEye 007, released only a few months later, to 8 million copies sold.
Yeah.
What Doom 64?
You know what? Maybe it would have been good in Doom 64, but it just seems like the game. I feel like if they had to do that, it would probably compromise the main campaign, which is why they didn't, because of storage space. That would be the only reason I could think of why they did so. And if that's the case, I respect it. But if they didn't do it just cause, and it wasn't because of storage space reasons, I'd be like, damn, that's crazy. But I'm imagining the reasoning is it can't handle it. Obviously, the Doom franchise has a lot of weapons, and they do like a bunch of particle effects, and they clearly made Doom 64 look the best it could at the time. Again, I feel like the demons are like really clay. So I think I'm assuming that's the reason. If it's not, sad.
While magazines and certain fans heaped praise on the more
4.8, 7.7, which one's IGN? And too much blood.
New musical score. There were just as many that felt the game
too much water,
very
not good.
Little gameplay-wise to make itself special.
Yeah,
timing was also a bit of an issue.
I really enjoyed this though.
Released in April of 1997,
let's see what else happened.
The franchise was already 4 years old, and the fact that this new version had no new gameplay tricks up its sleeve.
I thought it was really good though, but I guess I could see that.
Traps and shifting level layouts shouldn't really be surprising that some fans
they literally
disappointed in its
lack
of
it's the tropes. It's the tropes,
when
but
you
yeah.
stacked it up against the detailed
3D
animations and crazy weapons.
Yeah,
of
Turok was 3D as
Dinosaur
well
Hunter,
too. I guess that's a good point as well. Back then,
GoldenEye
I think
later that November, Doom
that's true. Those weren't
64
sprites.
very
That's true as well.
quietly just faded into the background.
You know what? That makes sense
many
as well.
dismissing it as just another Doom that had no deathmatch.
This does remind me. Now that I think about it, at the time, everybody was like, "Oh, 3D! Whoa! Whoa! Mario 64, bro! Look, he has polygons!" And then people probably see Doom 64, and I think that's probably another reason why they thought it was a Doom port, because it was still sprites. It was 100% still sprites, which definitely did not impress people. I'd imagine they'd probably be like, "I just want 3D." Like, yeah, I think it was a bit 3D because the demons were a bit more like clay, and obviously they weren't like spritey, but it still didn't look like a 3D game, you know? Like it didn't feel like it because you're still like hindered by like first person, and like the gun was still like sprite, and
But even though it fell well short of
it just probably wasn't impressive to people.
Copies, I have seen info
in comparison to this, where people are like, "Oh,
still did well for Midway," although it wasn't able to track down concrete numbers. But it is confirmed that Midway did immediately greenlight a sequel into production, which was ironically enough dubbed Doom Absolution.
That's funny. Got canceled though, obviously.
A bunch of new levels and features, such as a full multiplayer mode that reportedly would have focused on 2-player action rather than 4.
That sounds cool.
Might be explained, however, by the fact that they never got very far into its development.
But yeah, I know you can play the original Doom stuff multiplayer though as well. I've done it before.
1997. Now, this period is a bit murky, but it seems that Aaron Sealer and others were officially moved onto porting Quake, and that the remainder of the original Doom 64 team then
I'm waiting for the Quake remake. I know that's happening, right?
But once it became clear that it and the entire industry, let's be real, were now glazing Quake instead, Midway then decided to just cancel Absolution and move everyone on to the new hot shit.
Yeah, and again, look, it's 3D.
For about 20 more
it's 3D.
Years, nobody
it's not
really
spritey.
talked about Doom 64,
so that's probably another reason why Quake was getting
enthusiastic skeleton-based YouTubers who shall remain nameless.
Hey, I'm Derek. It's me, Derek.
But then eventually you started to see a shift where people began looking back at the likes of Turok.
Why does hand model look really good for the time? I don't know if it's just me, but those textures actually look banger.
Or Hexen on the Nintendo 64, and
Hexen, dude,
that despite
classic.
Being, very simple and straightforward,
classic though.
Doom 64 held up a lot better in terms of its really solid technical.
It definitely ran well. It definitely ran well.
Atmosphere.
Which is all you really need for a good game.
Also saw mainstream fans being exposed to mods like those by Samuel
And on top of that, they re-released it
who worked on such
when Eternal came out, I believe.
Doom 64 EX or the Absolution Total Conversion.
Absolution Conversion's funny.
The presentation and performance and let players soak in the atmosphere with much smoother controls.
This is cool.
And then in a total
Doom 64.
reversal of its original,
like I said, it got re-released.
Reputation, Doom 64
I remember that.
was entwined.
That's how I started. That's how I played it for the first time.
Doom, with the 2020 remaster
this
by
is when
Night
I played
Dive,
it.
adding the Lost Levels, a new episode that linked everything together
to
was
to Doom
by Kaiser. So,
like I said, it all
that is
to Doom
a
2016
very sudden
connected.
turn of events for what was once considered
which is awesome. It's a cult classic now.
That
it's
awesome. An afterthought amongst the likes of much flashier 3D.
Sometimes it just comes out at the wrong time.
Integral part of a modern storyline.
I think it genuinely just came out at the wrong time then for sure.
Rediscovering its qualities decades after its release.
It's funny that these games are big now.
Positive end to a what
just
happened
like,
episode.
When I say these games, I mean just like pixel games and stuff.
I told you, all this is awesome.
But if you know of any other games or
Anybody?
movies that did
There's
not
Madam
have
Web.
a happy
Oh no,
ending,
not Madam Web,
let me know
bro.
in the comments below.
Yikes.
Or enter the
What
UAC
happened?
facility.
There's
that
more
is
what
my
happened.
social media.
Oh, look at that blue sky.
See you next time.
Look at that blue sky. Woo!
And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Written and narrated by Matt McMuscles, edited by Jesse. Yeah. Little V Mills, I love that guy. Love that guy. Boom, boom. Once again, Matt McMuscles, baby.